I'm a 36-year-old female in Sweden. I've worked in mental health care for the last 18 years, mainly with people with psychotic illnesses like schizophrenia. I was working at a group home for 9 years, and we're very close with my coworkers there, especially 2 females. The last few years I worked there, another female started working there. We'll just call her M, and the 4 of us grew very close. She was very timid, shy, friendly, and we all got along well. She was often on long-term sick leave due to her own mental health issues, so we didn't meet much at work. However, she always showed up at our after-work dinners, allowing us to stay in touch even when she wasn't well enough to work full-time. She told us that she had a history of schizophrenia, just like the patients we were treating, but that she was medicated and hadn't had any psychotic episodes for years. Since I have an education in psychiatry and extensive experience with schizophrenia, I had no judgment toward people suffering from the illness, and didn't bother me to be friends with someone who had such a diagnosis, and even after what I will tell you, I still feel the same way. In the summer of 2023, I had moved on to work at a new place, still within mental health, but this time in forensic psychiatry. Like a halfway house for mentally ill individuals who had committed serious crimes, though. And the 4 of us stayed in touch and still met for dinner parties. M told us that she had been evicted from her apartment because of an incident where she accidentally entered her neighbor's apartment in the middle of the night. She explained that in the huge apartment complex, all the doors looked exactly the same and she had simply walked into the wrong door by accident. She claimed the neighbors had created a scene and reported her to the police out of pure drama. I felt that while evictions seemed out of proportion for that incident, perhaps the landlord took action because he had judged her based on her medical history, and I felt bad for her. I questioned her if something else had happened, but she insisted that that was the full story. In Sweden, it's very difficult to get a contract for an apartment after being evicted. You pretty much get blacklisted. M asked me if she could move in with me, and she said she was literally homeless, and I said, "Of course you can." I've always gotten myself into uncomfortable situations by saying yes instead of thinking about myself, and I had no idea how severe the situation would get when I said yes to M. I live in a small apartment with 1 bedroom, a living room that only fits a couch and a TV, a small kitchen, and a small bathroom. I also had 2 cats. We decided M would live in the living room, and I offered to throw out my couch so she could have the bed there, but she said she was fine with sleeping on the couch. I insisted on giving her a bed, but she declined. There's a door between the living room and bedroom, but only an open arc between the living room and hallway, so she wouldn't have total privacy. I hung up a thick velvet curtain to give her a sense of a door and more privacy. There's another door from my bedroom to the kitchen, so I kept the kitchen door open at night for my cats to go in and out. She wasn't working at this time because she was on one of her long-term sick leaves while I was working shifts. Sometimes I had to get up at 6 a.m. and sometimes I didn't get home until 11 p.m. I have severe insomnia, need to combine sleep medications, and even then I wake up easily. I told her I would appreciate if she could try to stay quiet on nights when I had to get up early, but that it was fine to be loud when I was off of work or doing evening shifts. She was a heavy smoker and coffee drinker, so I bought her a coffee machine to make her stay more comfortable. The coffee machine and sink are placed right outside my bedroom door in the small kitchen. The first night together, I had to get up at 6 a.m. for my shift. As usual, I had a hard time falling asleep. M had been up several times that night to smoke, waking me up each time. At 5 a.m., she started making coffee and the noise woke me up completely. I asked her nicely why she was waking up so early, wondering if she had any plans. She said she couldn't sleep. I explained that I really needed that last hour of sleep because of work and asked if she could wait until 6 a.m. to make coffee. I also mentioned that my epilepsy gets worse when I don't get enough sleep, and I was at risk of having seizures at work if I didn't sleep enough. She said that she wanted coffee with her cigarettes but would try to wait next time I had to work. Despite this, she continued to wake me up early in the morning and throughout the nights, insisting that she needed coffee with her cigarettes. I suggested making coffee the night before or drinking iced coffee or Coke instead, but she refused. She demanded silence at 10 p.m. because that's when she wanted to sleep, and I respected that. She also had moments of binge eating, emptying my fridge and pantry. Once, she ate an entire loaf of bread within 30 minutes of me leaving the apartment, promising to replace it once she got money. I had also told her to feel at home, so I couldn't really get mad, but it started to annoy me because of the cost and inconvenience. Em had long black hair that was everywhere, on the sink, floor, and bathtub. I'm not a clean freak, but it was unpleasant, and she also left fingernails and toenails on the bathroom floor and drops of urine on the toilet seat. I saw a silverfish on the bathroom floor which feeds on hair and nails, likely enjoying its dessert. I initially tried to imply the need to clean by putting a broom and shovel in the bathroom, but it didn't work, and I eventually asked her nicely if she could clean the bathroom floor more often, using we instead of you to avoid making her feel attacked. She promised to think about it, but nothing changed. I started dating a guy and was head over heels for him. He was also in a roommate situation, so we had a tough time getting alone time. I asked him if we could have one night to ourselves occasionally, but she could have the apartment to herself as well. She claimed that she had nowhere to go, no friends or family. I wasn't asking for 24 hours, just a few hours for quality time, and she eventually accepted after some persuasion and stayed with a friend one night while I stayed away the next week to give her more alone time. One morning, I found my cat's water bowl completely dried out. There was no spill, and it looked wiped out with a towel or paper. I had filled it the night before. She claims that the cats must have tipped it over, but there was no evidence of a spill, and my overly social cats began to withdraw from her, spending most of their time in my bedroom, which was unusual. I had an old saucepan from the 60s that meant a lot to me because it was my grandmother's and held nostalgic value. She burnt it and made no attempt to clean it, just left it on the stove and went out for a smoke. I found it ruined and cried, and she didn't even apologize. She also broke dishes several times without replacing them or apologizing, and this added to my frustration. After 2 months, she kept waking me up at night, binge-eating my food, never cleaning, never leaving the house, scaring my cats and ruining my things. I realized that she had stolen my prescribed sleeping pills. I had 20 in my nightstand when I left for work, and they were gone when I returned. She denied it, but no one else could have taken them. The summer heat was strong, and I felt locked up in my tiny bedroom with my 2 cats. I never got any time to myself or alone time with the guy that I was dating. My apartment was messy, and she was stealing from me. Out of nowhere, my old elementary school classmate texted me on Facebook and asked how I knew Em. He had seen my Facebook post about us being roommates. I told him that we were old co-workers and that she needed a place to stay because she got evicted, and he said, "I know. Do you know why she was evicted?" "Yeah, she accidentally went into her neighbor's apartment," I replied. He said, "That's not the full story. She broke in and snuck up to their sleeping baby with a knife in her hand. The father woke up and wrestled her down, saving the baby." I felt sick to my stomach. Could this be true? It would certainly explain why she was evicted, but it sounded so horrible. She seemed so timid, and my friend had the full police report. Apparently the couple that she broke into was his ex-girlfriend's family. It seemed Em had a psychosis during the break-in, but those parts weren't public. It was clear that she had been lying about what happened and how long she had been mentally stable. I started getting paranoid and wanted her to move out. We had a contract with a 30-day notice period. I knew asking her harshly would mean 30 days of chaos, so I wanted to handle it nicely. I started looking for cheap hostels for her to suggest so that she wouldn't be on the streets. I sat down with her and explained that I missed my alone time and the apartment was too small for 2 people. I said it wasn't personal and that I wouldn't want to live with anyone right now. I expressed regret and hoped that we would remain friends. She looked crushed and said it wasn't possible. I showed her the hostel I found and explained that I needed her to move out because I felt suffocated. The summer heat made it tough to keep the door to the bedroom closed, and I needed my sleep. She said that she would try to move out, but not until the 30 days had passed, and I agreed. The first night after our talk, she got up and made coffee at 2:30 a.m. I nearly had a mental breakdown. I was going to get up at 6 and couldn't go back to sleep. I asked her in the morning for probably the 10th time to wait until I got up to make coffee, but she didn't even answer. She just sat on the sofa and stared out the window. I was freaked out, but left for work. She kept being weird, making a mess, waking me up, eating my food, and all I could think about was the incident with her and the baby and the knife. Eventually, I got so angry about being woken up by the coffee maker that I unplugged it and stored it in my attic, which she had no access to. It may be childish, but I was going crazy and just wanted her to stop. The next night, I woke up at 4 a.m. to her making coffee in a saucepan. I tried talking to her again, but she just stared and didn't reply. In my frustration, I stored the saucepan in the attic too. The third night, the guy I was dating was sleeping over because I was getting really paranoid about her weird behavior. I woke up to him poking me, whispering, "Look." In the doorway, Em was just standing silently, staring at us. It was like a scene from a horror movie with her long black hair over her face. I didn't say anything at first, wondering if she was doing something by the door, but realized that she was still just standing still, staring. It reminded me of the ending of Paranormal Activity where Katie just stares at Micah. I sat up and said, "What are you doing?" But before I could finish, she slammed the door shut and I heard the sound of something metal falling and her running into the living room. I yelled, "You need to leave!" and just started crying hysterically because this was turning into a literal nightmare. Of course, I didn't go back to sleep and was really happy to have company that night. I kept asking myself if she had done this before, staring at me in my sleep. The next day I opened the door that she had slammed shut and saw a kitchen knife on the floor. And that was the metal sound that I had heard. I took all my knives and locked them in the attic. I asked a friend to come over when I told Em that she had to move out immediately. During the conversation, I tried to stay calm, knowing that she had a mental illness and meant no harm despite my frustration. She didn't answer me, just stared out the window. She left the apartment and sent me a text saying that I was disrespectful for bringing a friend over to her place. That night, I thought that it would be quiet without the coffee maker or saucepans. But at 3 a.m., I woke up to her burning dry coffee powder in a frying pan, and I was terrified. Her face was dead, her eyes black, and I suspected that in that moment, she was in a psychosis. I stopped the fire that was starting and she ran off to the living room in silence. She had an appointment with her psychiatrist the next day, and while she was away, I packed all her things and sent her a text telling her that she needed to pick them up and return my keys. I offered to give her money for a hostel for the remaining 26 days, and she didn't reply. The guy I was seeing came to keep me company in case she fought about it, and she didn't. She left the keys without looking at us and left. Our coworkers told me that she moved in with the guy that she was dating and stayed there for a few weeks until she somehow got an apartment on her own. She started working again, and I was always happy to hear this, and she seemed to be doing well. Then, in January, one of our old coworkers told me that Em had called her saying everything must burn, she had a baby to save, and some other very delusional stuff. She had called 112, the Swedish emergency number, but they hadn't taken it seriously. Em then proceeded to burn her entire apartment down because the voices in her head told her that she had to burn everything to save her friends and family. Her neighbors tried to rescue her, but she fought them off and ran back in, pouring liquor on the fire to make it burn more. She was arrested and sentenced last week for aggravated arson, and she will serve her time in a mental institution/prison for a long time, possibly forever. Ironically, she will probably be in the facility where I used to work and where she used to work herself. My old coworker was a witness at the trial. Apparently, Em had stopped taking her medication, the Abilify, because she felt that it made her numb and thought that she was stable enough to function without it. Apparently not. She had also stopped taking her medication the last few weeks that she stayed at my house, which explains her behavior. It's disturbing to think about what could have happened to me and my cats if she had stayed, or if I had been a heavy sleeper. I also think about what could have happened to that baby that she snuck up on before she was evicted. I know it's crazy that I just didn't throw her out sooner. It was complicated. The reason I haven't been able to talk about it with my friends is that they sympathize with her and minimize my experience. They think I'm making a bigger deal out of it than it was, and I sort of understand since they never saw the darkness in her eyes that I saw in those last couple days. I discovered this sub while with my friend Julia, who was with me as I'm typing this out because we just got back from a camping trip where we experienced the scariest thing either of us have ever experienced. So Julia and I are both women in our early 20s, and we were out camping in a remote area of Montana that isn't super popular, but it's still fairly popular amongst locals who camp a lot like we do. Which meant that it wasn't super unusual when we saw a group of 3 guys who looked to be a little bit older than us drive past our camp about an hour after we had set up our chairs and table. We just assumed that they were searching for a good spot to camp. But then, when the car was still in our sight through the trees, we saw it turn around, and as it was driving back, we both noticed one of the guys sticking his phone out the window and seemed to be recording us. Both of us thought it was really weird, and I walked a bit closer to take a picture of their license plate as a safety measure, but when I got closer, I saw that the back plate had all the numbers covered with black paint. Julia and I both got bad vibes from this, but both of us were aware that men are creeps towards women all the time, and both of us are prepared with bear spray because Montana is grizzly bear country, and we decided it wasn't a weird enough interaction to pack our stuff and find a different spot. We decided to set up an empty tent outside and sleep in my car instead to trick people into thinking that we were sleeping in the tent in case anyone tried to attack us. Now later that night, while we were both asleep in my car, we heard branches rustling and snapping near the empty tent despite the calm weather. Initially, we assumed it was a bear trying to reach the bear bag with our food and scented hygiene products, and then we heard male voices outside. I lifted my head to the window and saw the same car that had passed us earlier. I got off the air mattress on top of the back row of seats that we had put down to create a sleeping area and locked the doors individually to avoid the car making a beeping noise. Julia and I stayed still, hoping the men would leave. We would hear them talking, but it was difficult to make out their words from inside the car. The rustling and snapping of branches continued, leading us to think that they were trying to steal something from the bear bag. However, neither of us wanted to look out the window in case one of them spotted us. Eventually, we heard the car leave, which was a huge relief. However, we were too frightened to leave the car until daylight when other campers would be waking up. When I finally got out, nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. Above our tent, the men had hung a dead deer that had obviously been killed recently, as it was leaking blood all over our tent. The internal organs were ripped out and its limbs were cut off and laid out in a circle around the tent. This was disturbing enough on its own, but hunting permits weren't even being sold at the time, which meant that the deer had been killed illegally. And once we processed what we were seeing, Julia and I freaked out and drove away without taking down our camp. Once we had cell service, Julia called the police and the Forest Service to report what had happened while I drove home. The Forest Service was kind enough to retrieve our belongings, but I don't even want mine back in case there was some weird curse put on them with those weirdos. The police are investigating to impose a fine for killing wild game out of season, but as far as I know, what they did to us isn't technically illegal, just very strange and really creepy. I haven't heard of anything like this before, but if you have, let me know. I'm very curious and also very spooked. I love camping, but after this, I don't know if I can camp for a long time. So I, an 18-year-old female, work at a bakery, and it's not often that we get creepy people as customers. But the other day I was working at the register and an old man walks in. I always say, "Hi, welcome in, how are you?" And he didn't look at me or acknowledge what I said. He immediately pointed to a cookie and asked what flavor it was, to which I said the name of it, and then he asked what all was in it. I started listing out what was in it, and he cut me off and said, "Stop," all frustrated like. And then he finally looks at me and leans his face over the counter till he was about a foot away from my face and says, "Wow, you're a really pretty girl. You're so attractive, you know that, right?" I just said thanks in a monotone voice and looked down at the ordering screen because I felt very uncomfortable. But it gets worse. He then continues to say, "You must get that a lot, don't you? That you're so beautiful." And I said, "Not really." And he responds, "Oh, well, you're such a beautiful girl. How old are you anyway? 14? 15? Surely you're 15, eh?" And that's when my gut was telling me something is wrong with this dude. And I looked up at him and said very coldly, "No, I'm an adult." And he gets all antsy with his body language and says, "But what age?" And I said, "An adult." Because I didn't trust him knowing my age. He already could see my name from the tags that we wear on our hats, and that already made me feel nervous that he knows that piece of info about me plus where I work. He then shook his head like he was disappointed and said, "Oh, well, you're just really attractive. I hope you know that." And I said, "Okay," and then he ordered really quickly and left. The point of sale saved his full name from his credit card after he placed his order, and my coworker and I looked up his name and the town we're located in on a registered offender's website, and it turns out that he has a criminal record on it, which then made me feel sick to my stomach about the whole interaction that he was trying to have with me. When I finished uni, I moved back home until I found a job. As soon as I could afford to, I set up a profile on the website Spare Room. I was contacted by a guy named James who had a room to rent on the outskirts of town that I worked in. It sounded good, but he wanted to talk on the phone before inviting me to view it. We had a chat one evening, and it turned out that we had some things in common. We both enjoyed fitness, particularly swimming, and were movie buffs. And by the end of the call, it felt like chatting with an old friend, and I was looking forward to meeting him. James didn't specify his age, but I assumed that he was in his 20s like me. When I went to view the property, he actually came out of the house next door to greet me. When he introduced himself as James, I was pretty shocked. He was at least 50, dressed quite conservatively, and looked like he was wearing a hairpiece. If he told me on the phone that he was in his early 20s, I wouldn't have questioned it. I went ahead with the viewing, but I had already decided that I didn't want to rent a room from him. I wanted to live with people who were a similar age to me. I was also put off by the house decor, which looked like it hadn't changed since the 80s. When I viewed the bedroom, it looked like it was occupied by a young person. There were several pairs of trainers and a games console. James said that the previous tenant, Mark, was moving to London for work. Coincidentally, my name was Mark too. James invited me to sit in the living room after the house tour. I didn't want to be rude, so I did. He explained that he cared for his elderly mother, who lived next door, and then he started complimenting my style, saying I looked cool. He proceeded to put his hand on my leg, which made me feel very uncomfortable. When he asked if I was interested in the room, I said that I had some other properties to view but would be in touch. I then made my excuses to leave. Everything about him screamed a red flag, and I just wanted to get out of that house. As soon as I was back in my car, I called my mom to tell her how freaked out I was, and I absolutely would not be living there. James texted me a few days later to ask if I'd thought any more about moving in. I lied and said that I'd found somewhere closer to town, and I did eventually find something with some other young professionals, which turned out to be great. Some months later, our town was shocked by the news that a man's body had been found in the fields on the outskirts. He was later identified as Mark. I didn't think much of that until I saw a murder suspect that was his landlord, James, the same James whose house I viewed. I saw him on the news and got instant chills, and later he was convicted of Mark's murder. I take a walk every morning as part of my waking up routine. This morning, towards the beginning of my walk, I pass a man who asks me something. He's slightly too close to me, but not enough to make me uncomfortable, just enough that I don't want to slow down or have to listen to what he has to say. I had my headphones in as well and don't take them out, but hear enough that he had asked me for the time. Without breaking my stride, I glance at my watch, saying 7:30, and keep walking. If he said anything else, I didn't hear it. About 20 minutes or half an hour later, well far away from the first time I came across this guy, that same guy walks up from behind, again too close to me to ask for the time. I tell him at that point to get away from me, stop following me, and that I already gave him the time. That escalates things immediately because he shoots back. Why? Is it because I'm black? And I respond, no. It's because he approached me about a mile away with the same question. He says he lives in the neighborhood, so I say fine, but please stop following me. He denies following me and calls me a ching chong and yells at me to go back to China as I cross the street to put more distance between us. It was insane. And this guy follows me across the street and keeps following me as I cross back over. At this point, I'm yelling for him to get away from me and stop following me, and he's repeating the same lines about being black and hurling racial slurs at me. I'm getting worried that while there are people out at 8 a.m. either walking their kids to school or going to work, no one's going to step up because of bystander effect. After I cross the street for a second time, he gets right in my face yelling about how he's not following me. I have my back against an apartment complex and am getting worried that things are going to get physical when a tall woman with pink hair walks up. I don't remember what she said, but I at some point confirmed to her that he wasn't leaving me alone. She's about the same height as this guy and starts to yell for him to stop following me. He is now being badgered by her, and he's also yelling back the same denials about not following me, being from the neighborhood, and accusing that this is all because he's black. And thanks to my lady's savior, I'm able to break away. A couple that was exiting their apartment who witnessed all of this asked if I'm alright, which I say yes without stopping. I walk half a neighborhood block down to duck through an alley. As I'm walking down the alley, checking the entire time to make sure that the guy's not following me, I see the woman with the pink hair had disengaged and is walking off. I'm so glad it didn't escalate for her and feel bad for not being able to thank her for her help. I take a very circuitous route home, looking behind my shoulders every once in a little while. It was summer break, and we, my family, didn't go on any trip, unlike every break. I was just 8 years old and my younger sister was 3. We were playing along with other kids who lived in the same building as us, just on different floors. The building is not exactly an apartment building, it's more of a multi-storied house. The front gate is a bit further from there and the only entrance and exit of the building. So since we were downstairs and playing, anybody who would enter or exit the building would be visible to us, and we'd greet them because every tenant knows us and we know them, as well as their family members who might visit them. A new person visiting any tenant is rare but not impossible, and right adjacent to the big entrance gate is a small old-style window with grill, but it has a small opening at the bottom. We were all playing, but then I got tired and sat on one of the chairs placed on the porch area, and from there, the window thing was on my right side and I could see the gate clearly. I was just looking out when I noticed a man staring at the gate, and he was able to look at my sister and friends through that gate. It concerned me when I realized that he wasn't even trying to look away and was just staring at them blankly. I turned around from where I was sitting to signal my friend to move to the other side, away from his sight, but she didn't understand. Frustrated, I turned back and was about to stand up when my gaze fell on the guy and he was now staring at me. My body froze and I could feel fear creeping up on me. I couldn't move, I don't know why, but I stared back at him and suddenly he started smiling. And when I say smiling, I mean full-on grinning from ear to ear. And that scared the soul out of me, and I mustered some courage, got up, and ran towards my friends. I didn't tell them anything and just asked them to go upstairs with me, which thankfully they did without questioning. I didn't tell anything about this to my parents because I thought that they would stop me from going downstairs to play. The next day, we came to play again, and I looked through the window just to make sure that he wasn't there. Fortunately, he wasn't, or so I thought. 15 minutes in, and I spotted that guy again. He was, again, standing at the very spot and staring at us, at me. I tried to play it cool because my friends knew nothing about him, but I couldn't for long, and we went back inside again. From what I remember, this happened for 3 to 4 days, and now my friends started complaining about how I didn't let them play and that they had to come back earlier than they were supposed to. On the 5th day, or 4th, I don't remember correctly, I made up my mind not to pay attention to him and just focus on playing. We were playing cricket that evening, and I was batting. I hit the ball hard, causing it to go over the gate, which was a very normal thing, and as per the rule made by us, the one responsible must fetch the ball. My heart started beating because I could see his grin getting wider and creepier. He went towards the ball in the road and picked it up. He then held his hand out, gesturing me to come and take it. I was scared, but I had to go, so I did. As soon as I reached to take the ball from his hand, he bent close to my ear, and his words are still ringing clearly in my ears to this day. "I'm a good man. Look at the window when you go inside. I'll leave something for you." That sent shivers down my spine, and I ran with the speed of light. After we were done playing, I saw him sliding a piece of paper through the little opening. He then looked at me, grinned, and waved goodbye. I grabbed the paper and opened it. He had written his phone number and asked me to call him at 2 in the afternoon, knowing my parents would be asleep by that time. It was also written that if I didn't do it, my friends' lives would be in danger. As an 8-year-old, I didn't know any better, so I called him using my mother's phone. He picked up, and I didn't have the courage to say anything, so I stayed silent, and he said, "You're a good girl, just like me. You should come stay with me. Come outside. I'm waiting to pick you up." Since I lived upstairs, I went to the balcony, and he was actually standing near the gate, looking directly at me, waving and smiling. I couldn't contain it anymore, so I started crying and disconnected the call. I ran inside and bawled my eyes out in my room. Thankfully, my mother didn't wake up, and I cried it all out. I didn't go out for the next few weeks, and everybody kept asking me about it. I still didn't tell them. That guy stopped coming too, and I don't remember when he stopped coming, but he did, and I was relieved. And eventually this experience just started fading, and I grew up. Fast forward 10 years. I was 18, and my mother asked me to buy some snacks. I took my sister and went out, and the shop that I had to go to was at the end of the road, several houses away, so not too far. I was standing in a queue when I felt uncomfortable because the man behind me kept pushing me. Annoyed, I looked at him only to realize that it was the same man. My face went pale, and I could feel my heart throbbing in my throat. I tried not to panic and calmed myself down by telling myself that he couldn't do anything in public. There were tons of people there, and that gave me a sense of security. As soon as my order came, I took out my wallet hastily to pay, but he beat me to it. The owner looked at him weirdly and then at me because I was a regular there, and he was seeing this man for the first time. I paid for it anyway, and the owner politely asked him to take his money back. I gave the bag to my sister and asked her to go home and inform our mom about a man following us, and just in case he attacked, I'd have a backing and she would be safe too. Our house is within the vision range of the shop, so I waited for her to get inside. And now it was my turn to go home. As soon as I stepped out, the man followed me and he said something like, "You're a beautiful lady now. We should catch up." I kept walking and walking, but now that we were far from the shop, he started speed walking and I had to walk faster. I could feel goosebumps all over my body. I started running and I could see him catching up to my speed when the owner called for him loudly, saying that some of his money was still at the counter and asking him to come back, which gave me enough time to get inside and lock the gate. I haven't seen him since that day, and it's been 2 years. I'm 20 now, and I hope to never meet him again, and I hope I never see him again. I don't know why, but it's instilled a sort of paranoia in me, and I dread seeing him when I turn 28. A bunch of years ago, I matched with a guy on Tinder. I was a freshman in college and just got out of a relationship and was having fun. I matched with this guy. He was 24. We'll call him D. He was a little odd, but we had similar interests and went to the same school, so I thought, why not? The red flag started rolling in immediately when I said I would go on a date with him. Of course, the fact that he was much older isn't lost on me as the initial red flag. At this time, I didn't have a car. D offers to pick me up, but tells me that he's not in town, but he would leave his grandmother's funeral early, which was at a minimum 5 hours away, to come and pick me up. He showed up in sweatpants, a wife beater, and flip-flops, which struck me as odd because he said that he was coming from a funeral. We had made plans just to get a bite to eat and hang out. Since he had been out of town, he asked if it was okay if we stopped by to pick up his dog. He left the dog with a friend. I like dogs, so I was like, no problem. It's dark and we pull up to an apartment complex and he leaves me in the car and comes back with a golden retriever. The dog immediately starts growling at me, which has never happened to me before, so I start feeling a little weird. D doesn't say anything about the dog's temperament. Because we have the dog, he wants to drop him off at his house, and this feels logical to me, so I agree. When we pull up to D's house, he asks if I want to come in, not wanting to sit in the car, and I do. The moment I walked in, I immediately knew that it was the wrong choice. The house was trashed. There's garbage everywhere, trash bags full along the front entry, bottles and wrappers on the couch, and just general crap everywhere. D lets me know that he has a roommate, but that roommate isn't home. I assume this is to imply that the mess isn't his. After brushing the trash off the couch, she asks if I want to sit and play chess. I had expressed that I was interested in learning, and he seemed more than happy to help me learn, and this too was a mistake. D begins explaining the game to me, and it isn't just fun first date explaining. He's gotten very serious and is showing me each piece while telling me what it is and what it does and how it moves. D then begins questioning me over each piece, which I mostly get wrong, and every time I get one wrong, he yells at me the correct answer and tells me to try again. He got more and more frustrated and it made me very uncomfortable, so I suggested that we just pause chess and do something else. D suggests watching a movie, which is fine with me. The idea of us leaving and going to get food was seemingly forgotten. D tells me that we can watch a movie in his room and I oblige, but then he explains that he has to put clean sheets on the bed. I'd assumed that we were moving to his bedroom because it may have been cleaner, but when we go in, it's not, and there was no TV in his room. He proceeds to put on Iron Man 2 on his phone to have us watch, and we watched about 10 minutes of it before things got intimate. I won't tell you strangers all these details, but short story short, we didn't actually go through with it, but other little things went down. I will say those things were consensual, and after they occurred, I was feeling really odd about the whole situation and told him I didn't want to go any further than that. D was confused but didn't push it at first. He said fine, and we watched maybe 5 more minutes of the movie before he said that he didn't want to watch the movie anymore. He started complaining and asking me why I didn't want to do things with him, and I simply said that I wasn't in the mood anymore. He then began pressuring me to tell him exactly what it was about him that made me feel that way. And at this point, we had moved from the bedroom back into the dirty living room, and you might be thinking, seems like a perfect time to leave. And I thought so too, but this is where things start to get scary. As if he knows I'm thinking about how I'm leaving, he explodes and begins to scream at me. This is a 6-foot-something man screaming in the face of a 5-foot-nothing young girl. Of course, I'm internally freaking out, but I'm trying to make sure that I don't make him any more angry, but also not agreeing to anything. For the next 5 to 10 minutes, D screams at me about why I don't like him, why I don't want him, and continuously asks what's wrong with him and to tell him. I tried to placate him as best as possible, saying the old, "It's not you, it's me," and "No, I don't want to leave." Again, This man is my only ride home, and I'm truthfully not sure exactly where I was. Though I did have my phone and Google Maps, I didn't have Uber downloaded at the time. D finally calms down when he believes I'm going to stay, then suggests we try playing some video games. I was in full internal freakout mode, trying to make sure that I was playing the part of the interested date because I was terrified that if he felt that I wanted to leave, he would freak out again. We played this game for a while. I forget what it's called, Overwatch or something, and D starts getting upset again. He starts yelling about why no one likes him and why no one wants to get to know him and why no one loves him, saying that he has never had a girlfriend and all his dates had been just one-night stands. Again, I placate him with I don't know, lots of girls are just snooty like that. And at this point, I'm saying anything and everything he wants to hear. He even starts crying about how his mother never loved him and telling me very deep, dark things about what his mother has said to him and treated him like. After he finally calms down once more, he gets up and goes to the kitchen to fix us some drinks. Now, if you're anyone with a brain, you're thinking absolutely not, which was my exact thought at that moment. I decline his multiple offers for a drink, and he asks instead of alcohol if I wanted water, and of course I declined that too, feigning that I wasn't thirsty. I stayed at his apartment until about 1 a.m. because I was sitting next to him, terrified to 1. Ask him to take me home, 2. Say I'd walk home, or 3. Figure out how to get an Uber. I've been trying to download Uber on my phone without him noticing, but then it asked for card information, and that was too hard to do without him noticing. So around 1 a.m., I yawn very loudly and say, "Oh wow, it's 1 a.m. My roommates are going to be so worried about me." I laugh, as if my roommate would be stupid to worry and that I hadn't been watching the clock since he picked me up at 9 p.m., and then said, "Oh, I'm so tired, I should get home soon." Again, I was super scared that he would freak out, but he didn't explode. He just looked at the clock and said, "Yeah, it was late," but I was not taking any chances, so I said, "I got a great idea. If I get to bed soon, I'd love to have breakfast with you on campus." I was hoping my offer convinced him that I was intending to see him again, and it did. He seemed very happy at the prospect of it and jumped up, walking me out of my house into his car. The drive back was excruciatingly long. The ride was completely silent, neither of us spoke. It was only a 10-minute drive, but I could have sworn that he slowed down every time we got to a particularly dark area or underpass. D dropped me off, and I smiled and made a good show of being tired yet excited to see him tomorrow. He offered multiple times to walk me to my door, but I declined every time and said that I didn't want to bother him and I'd see him tomorrow. I walked myself to the building, and the moment I got around the corner, I sprinted so fast up the stairs and to my door before he could change his mind and follow me to my door. When I got in my dorm room, I genuinely felt like I had just escaped a serial killer. Even now, writing it makes my heart race a bit. I never met up with him, but he begged me for multiple days after to meet up with him again. He even asked to pay me $20 an hour to sit near me in the library. I declined, obviously, and only ever saw him once after at the gym on campus. He didn't see me, and I left immediately. I thought about D occasionally since the date and wondered if all those girls that he had one-night stands with had the same experience I did, and I still sometimes wonder how many girls there were after me. When I was in 3rd grade, my family and I moved out of state for my dad's job. I started at a new elementary school and quickly became friends with a girl I'll call Maria. The two of us were inseparable, but her hobbies were something I wasn't used to. This was about 2012, and a big thing she loved was gore. Not just any scary movie gore, but like MLP, My Little Pony gore. She really introduced me to a very dark side of the internet for an 11-year-old girl. She kept a binder full of these gory images and often showed them to me on the bus. First red flag. Second red flag, the boyfriend. Being a literal child at the time, I didn't understand the sudden interest in dating among my peers, but Maria had a boyfriend. It was your typical elementary school relationship, giggling at just holding hands. And it was as short-lived as any elementary school relationship is, with him breaking up with her without a care in the world. But she did not take this well. She gathered our little crew on the playground with me as her right-hand man. She laid out the plan. We were to chase the boyfriend, or ex-boyfriend, I guess, catch him, hold him down, and she would beat him up, I guess. We all didn't want to do this, obviously, but she zeroed in on me. I was her best friend, and I was supposed to do this for her. And I, being the stupid 11-year-old that I was, told her that she was acting insane and I was going to play with the boys. From that point on, we weren't best friends. She was my bully. She harassed me endlessly with little texts constantly popping up on my flip phone, calling me names on the bus and telling authority figures that I had started it. Eventually, this culminated in a sit-down with the principal where we were both scolded and told to play nice. And for a bit, everything was calm. Then the art room's scissors started going missing. Red flag number 3. I had been chatting with a friend on the bus when Maria put a pair of scissors very close to my neck. She laughed it off, and I stayed quiet, just wanting to keep some sort of peace at school. I knew she had stolen them. I never understood why I never said anything, and things were quiet for a while again. But one day, a day that still haunts me, a day that has put up barriers in me that I shouldn't have had at a young age, I was taking my usual bus route, arriving early and taking a seat near the back. Maria arrived, sitting by herself on the opposite side nearer to the front. We took off and began the ride to school. As we neared the elementary school, Maria and I locked eyes, and I'll never forget that smile. She proceeded to pull a kitchen knife from her bag, one of the big ones from her knife block. She flashed it at me before zipping the bag as the bus came to a stop. I remember sitting in my seat as everyone piled off the bus, and I don't remember much after that. I remember freaking out in front of the school, and I remember sitting in the office all day. I remember talking to men in uniforms, and I remember reading something I probably shouldn't have. She was planning to hurt me and the boy who broke up with her, and she was suspended for the rest of the year. I moved before she came back, and I never saw that crazy girl again. This is not my story, but my mom's from the late 80s. It'll be a short one, but after all these years, I still think about it. I apologize in advance for any grammatical errors, but my mom was spending an ordinary night in her apartment. She had a miniature dachshund named Rocky, who was her only roommate. For context, my mom is a really pretty blonde. She was frequently complimented on her looks and still is. She had recently rented this place to escape a very soured relationship, a fresh start, if you will. Getting ready to tuck in for the evening, she started toward the front door to let Rocky outside to use the bathroom. Something came over her to look outside first. Just that split second was all she needed to listen to her intuition and take a quick peek out the window. As she looked outside, she saw a man standing at her door, staring directly at it. No one had knocked or made any sounds, and he was just standing there as if he was waiting for her to open the door for the very reason she intended. My mom immediately called the police, and when officers arrived, the man had vanished. She never got a great look at him since it was dark. Other than acting extremely suspicious and creepy, there was nothing the cops could really do other than keep an eye on the place and look out for this man. My mom spent the rest of the evening with one of her girlfriends who came over to stay the night with her. Not exactly a terrifying story, but one I remember strongly from when she told me in my 20s. And I shudder to think what could have happened if she had opened the door. I got the sense that this person knew my mom lived alone. Who knows? Maybe it was someone at the wrong door or someone playing a prank that they never owned up to. My mom has always been tough as nails, and maybe that also goes hand in hand with being smart and trusting your instincts. Hi, I'm a 34-year-old female and not really looking for advice. I just want to share my story. Many years back, I dated a man-child, relatively the same age as myself. We got along quite well, He presented himself as gentlemanly, hospitable, kind, and loving. In hindsight, things escalated quite quickly. We went from being friends to being exclusive within a month, not enough time to truly know someone. This story is quite lengthy, so I'll do my best to shorten it without leaving out integral details. We saw each other daily, mostly at his house, which was fine with me in the beginning as I'm rather introverted. A couple of months into our relationship, I started to question why we weren't leaving the house, why we weren't going out and experiencing new things or trying out new hobbies. His responses were always cloudy, and he always tried to redirect the conversation, thinking that I was truly stupid and couldn't tell that this was an obvious avoidance tactic. And that was the point where I started to become curious, and from there it went downhill. I'm not an intrusive person, but considering he was my partner, I had a right to inquire why we were isolating ourselves. And after some mild questioning for a few weeks, I noticed that he began to create some distance. This noticeable change was hard to ignore and pretty much confirmed my suspicions. However, I'm not going to make a decision based on assumptions. I'm ashamed to admit this, but one night while I was sleeping, I went through his phone. I still feel disgusted even though I found 100% proof that I was a side chick. I couldn't believe it, and I still can't. I was with this person daily. It obviously confirmed why we were so confined to his home, but it was perplexing because she had no idea about me. It was 2 a.m. when I looked through his phone, and there was no way that I could sleep beside him for the remainder of the morning, so I quietly got out of bed, collected my things, and went home. The next day, I believed that he realized what had happened. However, he never contacted me to see why I left. Things remained silent for the entire day, and then I received a phone call later that evening. I confronted him. Again, I'm ashamed to say that I did take photos of the evidence as I knew that he would try to gaslight me. The fury in his voice was palpable. He did what a usual abuser would do and blamed me for going through his phone while totally ignoring his infidelity, and it was utterly pathetic. He had created this delusion that I was going to contact the other girlfriend and tell her all of his wrongdoings, all his infidelity, lying, and cheating. I would have done this, however, while I was looking through the phone, I realized that this girl was very sheltered. She was completely oblivious to what was going on. I was afraid that he would retaliate against me and her, and I thought to myself that eventually she would find out. I do regret not informing her, but my decision was my decision, and I can't change that. And this is where my nightmare begins. He was so paranoid and confident that I was going to contact his girlfriend that he would constantly call me daily and make vague threats against me. I persistently advised him that I would not contact her, that it was none of my business, and that she would eventually find out that he was a deceitful, inept brainworm sooner or later. All I wanted was for him to screw off, leaving me alone and never speak with me again, and that was my only request. He obviously didn't take my words very well, and he continued to harass me. Only a few days later, things completely erupted. His paranoia exceeded levels I've never seen before. He sent me a threatening message with the context being, "I have compromising photos of you, and I will release them," as he believed that I would ruin his relationship. I couldn't believe the delusion. No matter what I said, no matter how I phrased it, I even had my mum speak with him at one point, but it was useless. I sent him a message stating that if this was true, and if he messaged me again, I'm going to call the cops. 5 minutes later, I received 11 messages in succession. A few were videos, photos, and personalized animations of himself. I'd never seen these images, videos, and animations before, and they were taken without my consent, and these were extremely intimate and compromising. Unbeknownst to me, he had cameras set up around his room. These weren't just threats. These were screenshots of these images, videos, and animations uploaded on various sharing sites. Luckily, he lacked intelligence. He sent me the evidence, and there was nothing I could do to stop the uploads. I immediately went to the police, and they did manage to take some down. However, there were no promises, as once a photo was uploaded, it could be immediately archived. This has forever altered my life. I don't see relationships the same. I can't be intimate, and I can't form strong bonds. I become apathetic, I'm forensically observant, and I have difficulty trusting everyone, even my family, and so much more. In conclusion, the police were rather efficient and treated me well. I was granted an immediate protection order, a family violence order. He broke that quite quickly and called my phone trying his best to apologize, begging to drop the charges. He was so pathetic that he got his mummy to ring me and try to persuade me. I immediately called the police and they took immediate action. This ended up going to court and I won. It's not the result that I wanted, however, he did get his name on that good old offenders registry, which is far more egregious than people may think. Nevertheless, this is beyond life-changing. And to all those who have gone through this, I'm sorry. I feel your pain. Be careful around the people who you think you trust. I know that's quite nihilistic and pessimistic, and these are some of the unfortunate aspects of life. It's quite paradoxical. Humans are social creatures, but many humans are just pure rat crap. I live in Sacramento, California, where every summer we have the state fair. I was in my late teens and my friend and I, both females, decided to check out the fair together. Parking was $10 and we were cheap and decided to park across the street. Well, a few streets deep in from across the street because a lot of people had the same idea. The fair was typical fair shenanigans and we had fun. It was almost 10 p.m. and we decided to get out of there. The fair was lit up with lights and chaos, but the further we got away from it and the deeper we got into the back streets across the street from the fair, the darker it got and the less people you saw. My friend said facetiously, maybe I could get my mace out just in case. And we both laughed because both of our families at different points had given us mace to stay safe, but because we were young and dumb, we thought that we would never need it. My friend drove, so she was digging in her purse looking for keys and slowed down while doing so when I was a few feet ahead of her. At that moment, the fair fireworks started popping off in the sky, and I turned around to look for several seconds and was walking backwards while doing so. I turned around, and at the moment I was passing a creepy gray van, and a man popped out from behind it and grabbed me forcefully with both arms, starting to pick me up. Immediately, my friend ran up and sprayed mace in his face, which she was able to do because the mace happened to be attached to her keychain, which she had just taken out of her purse. She accidentally got some of the mace in my eyes, and it hurt terribly. Even though my eyes were burning, I vividly remember opening them enough to see a cloud of mace floating in front of the guy's eyes, which were wide open, as if the mace did not affect him at all. And then he said calmly in a creepy voice, "I was just looking at her." And we both screamed bloody murder, and he let me go. We ran all the way to our car and got the hell out of there. The weird thing is, we didn't even go straight to the police that night because I wasn't sure if that was enough of an offense to do so. I'm now in my 40s, and I know that it is. My true crime-loving self now is pissed off that I didn't go straight to the police then. I tried calling the non-emergency line the next day to report it, as I was suffering from red and swollen eyes from the mace, but I was placed on hold and not taken seriously. Eventually, I let it go and moved on with my life. A week later, I heard in the news that there was a man wanted by the police who lingered around the American River trails, which is near where the fair was, who was abducting women, taking them into his van, and doing terrible things to them. And I always wondered what would have happened if my friend wasn't there. Would I even be here? I've never been so thankful to be maced in my face. And ladies, even men, carry mace or some type of self-defense tool. It's an unpredictable and scary place out there sometimes. In 2020, I met this guy at the mall where I worked. He owned a tech store there, repairing phones, and since our offices were right across from each other, I saw him often. One day, he came up to me, asked for my name, and we made small talk. We exchanged numbers and started seeing each other. One night, I was so tired from work that I didn't want to go to dinner with him. As a single mom, I get burned out easily, and I told him that I didn't want to go anymore, but he said, "No, get ready. I already made the reservations." I firmly refused because I was exhausted and didn't appreciate being forced into anything. Being controlling is a major turnoff for me, so I was already considering ending things with him. Despite my refusal, he insisted, saying that he was on his way. I told him that he could waste his gas if he wanted, but I wasn't going. To my surprise, he showed up at my apartment, honking non-stop and calling and texting me incessantly. I threatened to call the cops, and when he didn't stop, I actually did. As soon as he heard the sirens, he sped off. The next morning, I woke up to 60 text messages and 100 missed calls from him, expressing his disbelief and anger that I stood him up. It made me see him in a very, very weird light, as we had only been dating for 2 months and were not even in a relationship in my eyes. We had been intimate one time, after 2 weeks of seeing each other. He told me that he was a virgin afterward, and I started to believe it because of how things escalated from there. After that, we never did that again. He's Muslim and his parents are very strict. He would sneak out to see me, even though he was 24 at the time. After that night of honking, I broke it off with him and called him a psycho, telling him I never wanted to see him again. However, from 2020 to now, he goes through weird mental states, blowing up my phone once every 6 months or so, but I never respond. In October, he sent an apology saying that he had moved on and wanted to be on good terms as friends. He asked if he could take me to dinner to make up for what he'd done. I believe that he was being honest because I hadn't heard from him in months, and so I agreed. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Before we got our food, he got on his knees and begged me never to leave him again, saying that he was in love with me. I was terrified. I ate in silence to keep my cool and asked to go home, pretending I didn't feel well. Once I got out of the car, I was so relieved and promised myself that I'd never talk to him again. Since October of 2022, he has been texting me once or twice a week asking to go to dinner, and I never responded because he makes me sick to my stomach. I moved, so he doesn't know where I live. But recently he sent a picture of me while I was working saying, "That's you." It scared me because I had just switched to a different salon and he didn't know where I worked. He claimed he was driving around with a limo service, but there's no way that he could have seen me through the window. He had zoomed in to take the picture from a desk. I called the police, but they victim-blamed me, saying that I couldn't file a restraining order or order of protection because I didn't know his last name or home address. I'm in Chicago, Illinois, and I don't know what he's capable of. Please, help. I, a 36-year-old female, had been practicing Aikido for several years now. I have always had respectful interactions with men and women. However, recently there had been this older man, like in his 70s, who had come to the dojo. He has taught his own classes before, so my sensei invited him in to teach a class. The first class he taught, he put me on my back with my legs up to teach me a technique to protect against assault, as I was the only woman in the class. I didn't think anything about it, but everyone in the class was very weirded out about this specific lesson being very intimate, and after that I was on my guard. Then he started giving me and other women shoulder rubs. I felt uncomfortable and told my sensei. He stopped doing that and backed off at first, but now he's been creepy again. He always wants to work with me during and after class. I was talking to a new student after class and he shows up behind me with a Joe stick and basically chokes me with it because he wants to practice our technique. It's like he was mad that I wasn't paying attention to him. He notices whenever I'm not in class and asks about me. He calls me baby while practicing techniques. I'm still dealing with the situation, and I brought it up several times. My reaction is to freeze or shrug it off like everything is okay, but it isn't okay. I always felt safe in the dojo until now, and I worry that he might be given a key to the dojo, and he could lock me inside with him. And I also worry that he might be a creep to other women, too. When I was about 16 years old, due to my living situation, I had to make a 2-hour drive at least twice a month from a city area back to my parents' house in a rural area. About 1.5 hours of that drive was on country roads with nothing but valleys, corn, or other crops on either side, with the occasional farmhouse or building that seemed inhabited. Since I was used to this drive, I didn't think much of the long stretches without cell service or phone booths, and nothing had happened before, so I just assumed nothing would happen in the future, right? Well, one night, during one of those drives, as it was getting darker, I saw a flash of light. Well, that was weird. Maybe just a momentary visional glitch, I thought. Another flash. Perhaps someone with wonky high beams was coming my way. Another flash. Something was wrong. I slowed down a bit to avoid being periodically blinded and potentially swerving off the road. In the distance, I thought I saw a person. Actually, multiple people. My eyesight was pretty good, so I realized that I was approaching 4 people lined up across the road as if to create a roadblock. I didn't see any car that they could have arrived in, nor any farmhouses or sheds nearby. This encounter felt like it lasted an hour due to my anxiety, but in hindsight, it was likely no more than 5 minutes. Driving at about 10 miles per hour, I got closer and realized that I was approaching 4 adults with large, bright white masks staring in my direction. 2 of them definitely had bats or other long, blunt objects, and one person was holding something that emitted the flashes. I had seen enough horror movies and heard enough stories about crimes on roads like this to think that I had 2 options: slow down and risk them attacking me in my dinky car, or speed up and hope that they moved out of the way. I chose the latter. I had no means to protect myself other than a bat in the trunk, and as a young teen who could easily be overpowered, I didn't trust my car to withstand any assault. Hearing gravel and dirt kick up from under my tires, I was more freaked out by the potential of driving off the road or hitting someone. I accepted my decision, driven by adrenaline and fear, and accelerated. The 2 people directly in my way lunged out of the way just in time. I stopped accelerating to catch my breath and saw them in my rearview mirror, with the other 2 trying to chase my car. It became real that these people did intend to harm me. I focused on driving out of there as fast as I could. I didn't turn the radio back on, feeling shook by this experience. The most messed up part was getting home and realizing that part of the road that I had driven on wasn't just gravel, but there were nails embedded into my tires. Thankfully, I had some pretty sturdy tires, though, that didn't lose air pressure. I didn't tell my parents the full story. They assumed that I was reckless and that someone had scattered nails as a prank. My friends said it was probably just to scare me, especially since being in a car gave me an advantage. Still, it creeped me out, and I remembered it every time I drive on a similar road. I often add that it happened before that Purge movie came out. Otherwise, I might have felt more comfortable saying it was just a creepy but harmless prank. I still wonder where these people came from since there were no cars or buildings nearby. I noted this every time I drove the route in daylight. Even though it was mostly in a car, the close proximity and potential for direct interaction made it feel like a personal, creepy encounter. I had to share this since my friend had mostly heard the story and I had a nightmare about it recently. I still don't know if I'm overreacting, but I know for sure that those were people, and I was definitely afraid. Another story here reminded me of an experience from many years ago. Now, obligatory note, I'm on a mobile and I'm American, but this didn't take place in America. I grew up in a military family and we were stationed overseas during the story. We weren't in France, but my mom and I was 9 or 10 years old at the time, went on a big girls' trip with a bunch of our other friends to Paris over winter break. We were only supposed to spend 5 days there. The first few days went fine and we all had a great time. But on one of the last days, all the moms received emails that our flight back was canceled due to snowstorms. We spent an afternoon hanging out in the Starbucks under the Louvre, there's a whole mall down there, and trying to figure out travel plans to get back home to other European countries where we were all living. When the airlines rescheduled our flights, the several families were put on different flights over the next 3 days. However, they scheduled my mom and me on different flights on different days. Yeah, a 9-year-old girl traveling alone wasn't going to work, and the next available flight for both of us was a 4th day after everyone else. Our hotel room had bookings after we left, so my mom and I had to find another place to stay for some extra nights. Not a big deal, right? But when it came time for us to take a taxi to our next hotel, us being the only family left in Paris, the taxi driver gave us a weird look when he realized where he was taking us. Then he gave us a warning. Don't go out at night. I may have been 9, but I knew enough to know that that meant bad people and danger. I don't remember my mom's reaction, but I'm sure it wasn't good. We got to the hotel and it was nothing like the website had shown. They definitely lied on their site with stolen photos of a much better hotel, but my mom had already paid and it was only for 2 nights. We were sure not to stay out too late and had no issues the first night. The last day went fine, actually. We went up to the Basilique du Sacré-Cœur and hung around there for most of the day. When evening came, we made sure to go back to the hotel room earlier, and that's when bad things happened. When darkness fell, we started to hear a lot of people in the hotel lobby. We were only on the first floor and basically right above the lobby. The hotel was built in an old apartment-type building, typical for European city space. For Americans, much smaller than our hotels, and we initially turned on the French TV and tried to ignore it. Then there were pounding footsteps up the stairs and angry shouting in French. My mom definitely jumped at that and we felt uneasy. Then the angry French man started pounding on our door. We didn't speak French, and most of what he was saying was very slurred, and we only caught phrases like, "We know you're in there," and "We know you have them." And I, being 9, had no idea what they were talking about, but obviously my mom and I were terrified. She told me quietly to not make any sounds. Whatever state the TV was in, we kept it that way to make it seem like the room might be empty. The banging on the door just kept going, and the shouting didn't stop. The front desk people should have heard us, in all honesty. If we could hear them downstairs, there's no way that they didn't hear our door being assaulted. My mom called our dad, who was at home in our host country. We got him to try and call the French police, as he speaks some French, but he couldn't get through, and we were on our own. I slept with my clothes on, and we had suitcases prepped in case we needed to run somehow. I, being 9, late at night on a long trip, somehow managed to fall asleep because I was so tired. My mom didn't sleep the whole night, though. At some point, I was woken up by the door cracking. My mom said that she had never been so scared in her entire life, and the angry Frenchmen just kept going as they tried to break down our room door. The door didn't give, somehow, and eventually at some point in the early morning they left us alone. We left ASAP and went to the airport for the rest of the morning. I'm sure my mom reported the hotel on the booking sites, and we slept at our flight gate until it was a reasonable time to be awake. We ended up getting promoted to first class as an apology for the problems with scheduling, and after the harrowing experience of the past night, we definitely took it. It took years of telling this crazy story for my mom to tell me the hotel was probably selling and doing drugs below us, not a party like I had assumed, which is why no one responded. The staff were all too high to really do anything, and the angry Frenchmen were either so high that they imagined someone else was hiding in our room, or their drugs were stashed in there and we didn't know about it. And I have no idea how the door didn't break, but I'm just so glad that it didn't.